Hello, welcome. So in this video we're going to be covering how to create textures on the fly in Unity and save them to your assets folder. So for example here I've got a cube, simple cube, and it's got a script attached called texture creator that's going to be doing all the work, and there's a create button, and when you hit create it generates a new texture with random pixels. It saves the texture as texture1.png to this folder in the project, and this material is set up to use this texture, and the material is also applied to the cube, so the cube is updating automatically. So I'm just going to run through that chain and just cover how it's all working. The first thing is that this script here, texture creator, the way this button is appears here is to create a custom editor. So if you create a class that inherits from editor, and you use this attribute on the top, custom editor, texture creator, this is basically saying this class is a custom editor for the texture creator script. So anytime the texture creator script appears in the inspector, use this editor to display the controls for it. So what's going on with this script here, for example, this texture creator script, Unity's come in and said, oh, that's a texture creator script, we've got a custom editor for that, run that, and what that does is it actually creates a button. Well, the first line actually means that it will draw everything that it would have drawn previously for the script, so all of the controls that Unity would usually draw, and then it draws additional stuff. And the additional stuff I've got here is to create a button called create, and as well as specifying these controls, which ones should appear, it also has the handling code as well. So there's the same statement that basically declares the button and says add this create button. It also returns true if the button has been clicked in this, it's not really a frame, but if the button's been clicked in this, in the recent event that occurred. And on that I'm calling into the texture creator script that this is an editor for. That's how you access it here. You can access it as target, and I'm calling a method that I'll show you in a minute, called create, which basically passes in the size of the texture and width and height in pixels to create. So for example I could change that to 16 by 16 and then come in here to the cube and hit create. You get a reduced texture. So anyway, that's covered the editor side of things. Now for the texture creation part. So the texture creation part, the key part of this video for creating textures on the fly is this texture2D class. So what you can do is if this is a Unity class, you can create a new one. You can, in the constructor, you can pass in the width and the height in pixels, so basically your texture size. Once you've got that, you can then set individual pixels. There's a bunch of methods in here, but for the purposes of setting pixels, I think there's a few. You can set multiple pixels at once, but I kind of like this one. You set one pixel at a time, X and Y, you specify X and Y, and what I've decided to do is set it to a random color. And in the random class, which is the Unity random class that you usually generate random numbers for, there's actually a helpful little method called color HSV, which will actually return a random color, which is really useful. So I'd have to actually calculate random color myself. Just call that. In fact, it's got some nice little parameters. You can actually specify a minimum and maximum hue, minimum, maximum saturation, and so forth. There's a whole bunch of little options. I'm just going to pick a purely random color, although I note that they don't seem to be completely random. If you look closely, you can see there's clusters of, it seems to be 4x4 blocks of, say, blue and green and orange or brown. So it doesn't seem to be completely random, but never mind that. Once you've set all the pixels, this will basically set the pixels locally, because you don't want to set them all on. This texture exists on the graphics card. You don't want to set all the pixels individually, send that all to the graphics card individually, because of performance reasons. So the documentation recommends to call this method apply once you've set all the pixels you want, and they'll get all pushed up in one go to the graphics card. And after this, you've now got a texture on the graphics card which represents your changes, a new texture. And I actually saved this texture to a public field up here, just so that it'll appear in the editor here, so I could initially take a look at it before I figured out how to actually save it. I could quickly just see that it was actually generating. So the next step is to get that texture saved as a PNG file to this folder. Now there's a method on the Texture2D class called encode to PNG, and this will actually give you a byte array, and this is the PNG format for the texture, all of these bytes. All you then have to do is write these bytes to disk, to a file, and that file will be a PNG file. So the next question was, well, where do we write it on disk? Now I could have hard coded this. In fact, it would have kept it simple if I had. So this is where is it? This is the location I want to save to, texture1.png, in this folder. So I could have hard coded this, but what I've done is I've used this Unity string application.dataPath. That will give you this part of the path, everything up to the assets of your current project. It will basically give you that part of the path, your project and assets folder, and then I just added the rest, shaders, create texture, texture1.png here, and combined those using path.combine. It's probably overkill. I probably could have just added the strings together, join the strings together manually, yeah. And then once you've got the file path to write to, and you've got your data to write into that file, you can use this neat little .NET file library method called file.writeAllBytes, which is like a single line thing you can use to just write a load of bytes to a file, and it will create the file if it doesn't already exist. And that will create texture1.png on disk. The line after this is to get around a little issue I found, which was that after doing all of the stuff I just mentioned, you get your file written here, but if it already exists, then Unity doesn't pick up the fact that the file's changed unless you say Alt-Tab out of Unity and Alt-Tab back in again, which obviously you don't want to really do. So this line here, asset database.import asset with the asset name, this doesn't really import the asset, I don't think. It seems to more likely it does something like refresh. Maybe it does re-import. It might do re-import, but either way it picks up the changes then, and so you get your change values. And the main reason I wanted to generate textures on the fly was because I wanted to generate some noise textures, procedural noise textures. But then it's occurred to me since, after doing all of this stuff, that I could just use something online, something that's far more complete than anything that I would actually be able to create to do with noise. And you can just mess about, get a load of different settings, get a nice noise that you want, and then of course you can just download it. You can choose your size here, a huge one. So that makes a whole lot of sense. So now I don't actually have a reason for needing to ever use this, but maybe you do. Maybe you'll find a reason for it. Either way, thank you for watching. Hopefully it's been useful to you, and goodbye for now.